Good day, everyone, and welcome to S031 Understanding the Self. Our lecture for today is all about the self as a social construct. This is a combination of understanding the self from the perspective of sociology and anthropology. Again, this is S031 Understanding the Self. And so today, hopefully, you'll be able to articulate what culture means to the self as a part of the society. We will analyze the anthropological and sociological constructs of the self. We will attribute self understanding and behavior to cultural factors, and we will recognize and appreciate the differences in cultural behaviors of the self, particularly from the Western and Asian context. And hopefully, we will be able to explain how the modern world has changed our view of the self. You see, knowing the self requires understanding of our society and our culture and how it provokes us to make decisions which are often culturally influenced and socially constructed. It is quite impossible to understand the self without comprehending the culture of the society. And at this time, let us first define what culture is. Culture is that complex whole which includes knowledge, beliefs, arts, morals, laws, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. This was from Sir Edward Tyler, is considered as the founder of cultural anthropology. So culture is like a web in itself, that there are a lot of facets that are inclusive on this. And as I said a while ago, in trying to understand the self as a social construction, we will look at the disciplines of sociology and anthropology. And when we say anthropology, this is the inclusive study of the human race, its culture, and society in its physical development, while sociology is the scientific study of human life, social groups, whole societies, and the human world, whose subject matter is our own behavior as social beings in relationship with many other people. Now, the very foundation of the self in anthropology is understanding man in light of its cultural context, while in sociology, it digs into understanding the self in reference to the behavior of the society. Now, our culture sets the norms of our people. And since norms in the society are culturally based, we depart ourselves based on the cultural standards of our community. Norms are what dictates our behavior in our society. There are two components of culture. You have the material culture and the non-material culture. But just to make the definition of these two a little bit simpler, we say that material culture is the tangible expressions of our culture, while the non-material culture are the intangible expressions of our culture. Now, the self is clearly linked to his or her culture. We can never understand people apart from it, since it is the very personality of the society of our culture. In fact, our social personality is a reflection of our culture. Now, George Herbert Mead has his theory on the development stages of the self. For him, an individual explains his actions through the lens of his society. Thus, he belongs to a social structure, a social order. The individual sees himself as the focus of everything until such time that the self emerges because of the influence of those who play a prominent role in their self development. Now, we also have Clifford Geertz, who believed that man should be considered as an unfinished animal. For him, culture should not be seen as a complex behavioral pattern, but a control mechanism to program and direct human behavior. For him, man is an unfinished animal. That's why he's always dependent on structures to control his behavior. That's the reason why we have the laws of the land. And the laws of the land are very much reflective of that control mechanism for people's behavior. Because if we do not have the laws, then chaos will definitely take place. Now, the self also has a different perspective depending if you're from the West or from the East, since culture is very much relative. the behavior of the self is very much dependent on its context. This relativism is very much evident in the Western and the Eastern construction of the self. Now, in the individualistic view of the self, people are autonomous. These are countries which believe in the self-actualization of people, and sometimes they do not really regard so much of the intentions of other people, or they do not really regard so much what people would think about them for so long that they will be able to self-actualize. Now, these are people, okay, who are autonomous and who are focused on achieving their personal goals over the goals of their in-group. While on the opposite side, we have the interdependent view of the self. This is known as collectivism, okay, which explains that a person agrees or sees himself as an integral part of the communal group, be it his nuclear family. Your nuclear family is your family with your mother, your father, and your siblings, if you have, or your friends, or even your co-workers. Now, we also have the concept of the self as a product of the modern world. Now, there is a diversity and variations of these digital technologies in particular, which force us to confront the vast array of cultural traditions, challenging our own belief systems, our own traditions, our own belief systems and values, and exposing the strengths and weaknesses of our own worldview. Thus, we really have to be very careful, and we have to understand how the self is seen as a product of the modern world. These views of the self as a product of the modern world, we have to understand the self has to keep up with the ever-changing world. He needs to adjust, readjust, and to realign his actions with the seismic transformation and evolution of our society. You see, the values of a society changes over time. And even in case they do not, the society is trapped in the challenges of the modern world. The self then as a social construct becomes a product of the modern world, modern society, among other constructions. Now, we also have the selfie generation as culture creators, because the current generation are not just passive consumers of culture, but they are creators of culture just the same. Now, the effect of culture in today's younger generation must be highlighted because, okay, the Generation Z, also known as the selfie generation, is not considered as a passive user of culture anymore. In fact, they have become culture creators who practically live their lives and present themselves in the virtual world. Now, Generation Z is composed of those born between 1995 and 2010. And in the Philippine context, individuals who are included in this generation are practically perhaps in their senior high school or in their college years, while many of them can be considered as the youngest in today's workforce. Now, we also have the self as reflected in the collectivist teachings of Confucius. We know that China has been known to be very strict in its implementation of its rules about social relationship. This is so since it adheres to the teachings of Confucius, whom it considers as the supreme sage and the founding father of Chinese civilization. The influence of Confucius's teachings and philosophies have been infused particularly in East Asia's countries like Japan, South Korea, and with those who follow the teachings of Confucius. Now, the self is understood in the teachings of Confucius entails the participation of the other members of the society. The figure you see on your screen right now are the five cardinal relations in Confucianism, because for them, you really have to have a dynamic relationship, okay, with the people around you, because Confucianism is a social philosophy delineating the very core of human relationships, which the end goal of which is the spiritual growth. According to Confucius, as we ritualize and perfect human relationships, we in turn develop spirituality. This self-cultivation involves a dynamic process in the spirit of filial piety, brotherhood, friendship, discipleship, and loyalty as espoused in the five cardinal relations in the Confucianistic principles. Now, what we have to understand is that the self as a social construct integrates man as a member and a product of society. Thus, the self is embedded in the culture which he himself created and is able to generate, alter, and restore for his own purpose. It is of foremost significance that the social behavior of the self is, at least from the anthropological and sociological disciplines, greatly influenced by the person's cultural background, whether the individual is coming from an individualistic or a collectivist society. Hence, culture is an indispensable part of the self. As Geert explained, culture is not just an ornament of human existence, but the principal basis of its specificity, an essential condition for it. Again, as Geertz explained, culture is not just an ornament of human existence, but the principal basis of its specificity, an essential condition for our existence. And that wraps up our discussion on the self as a social construct. Thank you for joining us in this discussion. Please stay safe, stay sane, and stay strong. God bless everyone.